Hi, I'm Ariel. You're watching She Wants the Diction, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about the masterpiece that is A Little Life. So I've been wanting to talk to y'all about this book for like a week, but I had so many problems. Like, I'm having so many problems with my setup right now. Like, I think I told you guys before that like my camera is broken. I was using a phone for a while. I can't get the one microphone that I have to be compatible with either the camera or the phone. I either need to go buy a new camera or figure something out, but I'm also in the process of like setting up my new apartment because we've moved and it's just a whole big thing. Another issue is like lighting and having time to film. So I work during the day, and a weird thing about living in Arizona is that none of the like places around here really have overhead lighting, and so there's literally no overhead lighting in my apartment. So I'm having to use, like, there's literally just lamps, there's giant windows, there's like sunroofs in a lot of buildings around here, but like no overhead lighting, and it's just like normal. So I find it really weird personally, but okay, whatever, you do you, Arizona. So basically I have not had any daylight hours in which to film, and typically I film my videos whenever I feel inspired, which is typically the middle of the night, but I don't have lighting to be able to film in the middle of the night because, again, no overhead lighting. So here we are. I finally have a day off. I was also going to wait until I had like a physical copy of the book to film this video, but there ended up being a lot of issues with the delivery and wrong address, and I had to go track it down. I didn't know if it was at UPS or USPS. I went to 2 different post offices, and then by the time I finally figured out where it was, they told me they'd returned it to sender. So then I had to drive all the way to another Barnes & Noble to buy a beautiful copy of this book. And I don't know that I've ever like specifically gone out and bought a book like I did for this one. And this is the hardback. I did get in the hardback. This was like 40 bucks, but I consider it worth it. I wanted to get the hardback so that I could have this to like keep and reread, because immediately upon finishing this, I immediately wanted to reread it, which I know that a lot of people will probably think that sounds like just wild, because why would you want to put yourself through the pain and torture that is reading this book again? But I mean, if you've read the ending, you'll understand what I'm talking about, because it sort of calls back to a scene from the beginning of the book that was like making me want to take the whole journey again. So all of those excuses aside, let's talk about this book. I am fully aware that I like missed the hype train on this one because I believe it was nominated for the Man Booker Prize in like 2015 when it first came out, and you all know that I don't really tend to really like any of the Booker Prize winners. Like, I feel like I've read different ones and like none of them really appealed, so I'm kind of glad that it didn't win, because I feel like if it had been a winner, then like I probably wouldn't have liked it, if that makes sense. And I did read Hanya Yanagihara's other book, The People in the Trees, last year. Absolutely loved it. It made my top 3. And I just think she's a brilliant character writer and is really able to get inside the head of her characters. And that book really gripped me from start to finish. I was very addicted to it, finished it within like a couple of days. This honker is obviously like 700 something pages, so you can't really do that. It took me 2 weeks to finish this book, and I was reading it, you know, while we were moving, and continued reading it as we were setting up the apartment. And I feel like I was equally obsessed with it. Like, this book had a very slow start at the beginning, and honestly I wanted to DNF it at the beginning. I was like, you know, I'm 10% in, I'm not really invested, I feel like it's very slow paced, I don't recognize any of the voice that I loved from her other book, I don't see it here. Like, I feel like it's kind of like, okay, hear me out on this analogy, but when you're first starting a sitcom and like you don't know any of the characters, I feel like it's not as funny as later, as when like you understand the characters. Like, first you have to get past, you know, learning the characters, like the introduction to them. And that's what I feel like the beginning of this book is. So if you start this book and think that it's really slow and, you know, you don't like it and you're like, well, what's everyone ranting and raving about? I would encourage you to stick with it, because I think that it's worth it. And I'm really, really glad that I didn't just give up on it like I was planning on doing. And I did that because I personally had faith in the author from reading her other book, that I was like, there's no way this is not going to be good. And, you know, after I got through, I feel like that first part, I started seeing a lot of her writing, a lot of her style, a lot of her voice coming through, and I was like, ooh, yes, here it comes. It was like a slow drip. And yes, she definitely expands outward. Like, you can tell that the beginning of the book is not really her style, and then she starts taking you where she wants to go, which is into the life of one of these 4 characters, Jude. So I want to talk about why I gave this book 4 stars, and that is the rating that I give for books that I really, really love, that I feel like stood out in some way. typically, because I'm such a perfectionist, I will only rate a book 5 stars if I find it perfect in every single way, flawless, which obviously is not going to be a whole lot of books. But I do think this is a 5-star read for the simple fact of, although it is not technically perfect, like I feel like there are some issues, as I said, with the beginning is slow, the pacing. There are certain characters that kind of fell to the wayside, such as Malcolm, that I definitely wanted more detail on. Things like that. Like, I feel like it is not always technically perfect, but it is perfect in the sense that when you read a book, I feel like what we're looking for when we read books is something that will touch us emotionally. And this book definitely does that. And something that has fundamental truths about humanity and human nature contained within it. And I definitely felt that. I highlighted so many passages in this book that I just feel like are brilliant ruminations on like human nature. And another reason it's a 5-star read is just because I feel like certain lines from things, songs, passages, you know, paintings, images, certain pieces of art that become a part of you, like become embedded in your psyche, you know, like certain lines of poems and so forth. I feel like parts of this book just like got lodged in my brain, like they're permanently there now. And I feel like when a book, you know, lives on in your mind like it's a part of you, that is what we are looking for when we read. We're looking for, you know, the emotional impact, the beautiful language, the characters that we love or hate. And yeah, that's the experience that you're looking for every single time that you read a book. And does it happen often? No. But it did happen with this book, and that is why I would characterize it as 5 stars. There's also so much to discuss with this book, so much to the point that I feel like I couldn't even, like I'm sitting here and I'm like, well, I'm not going to be doing a review because I feel like my thoughts are just, I have so many thoughts and there are so many topics that this book brings up. You know, like child abuse obviously is a huge one, trauma, self-harm, friendship, growing up, like there are disability. There are so many topics that you could talk about with this book that I find it hard to just sit down and try to give like a single one, like try to jump off from a single one because it covers so much. I watched a lot of reading vlogs because for some reason there seems to be a lot of reading vlogs of reading this book, and I was honestly surprised by the lack of like spoilery sort of discussions of this book and like any really analysis of it. So I felt like what I wanted to do was just kind of a ramble. I wanted to discuss this book with someone that had also read it, and because I don't have that and it's going to be really hard to get anyone to read a 700-page book just to have them talk about it with you, I was like, I'm just going to have a rambly video where I just sit down and sort of talk about different things, whatever comes to mind when thinking about this book. Now this book is very, very sad, and also a lot of people, I feel like, warned me about it. Like a lot of people will just say, oh, every possible trigger warning under the sun is in this book. And so as an abuse survivor also, I did not feel triggered by this book, but also I have not experienced sexual abuse. I've been through physical, emotional, verbal, religious abuse, but not specifically sexual abuse. Another major part of this book is like self-harm and cutting, so you know, maybe look out for that. But as far as like, I feel like a lot of people like warned me off this book, like they were like, be careful, you know, just because it's really dark and it's really graphic. But I do think if you're an abuse survivor that you should read this book. And the reason being that I feel like I read this book at a perfect time in my life. And what I mean by that is, you know, less than 6 months ago, I've been writing a lot about it on Instagram, but I just recently was able to identify the fact that, you know, I have been through abuse, I survived abuse, I was able to name and recognize it as abuse, you know, over 10 years later. Only just now am I realizing, and coming out of what feels like a stupor almost, like, it's like, you know, the past 10 years of my life, you know, I've been running and I've been avoiding and not able to acknowledge, name what happened to me for what it was. And there's a lot of fear and shame and guilt and pain just associated with abuse, obviously. I do think this book could be really healing to abuse survivors, and it's because I feel like a character like Jude is so important. I felt like I understand Jude on a fundamental level because, like, on some level I am Jude. Obviously I didn't go through the extremes that he went through, but the ways that he acted and the ways that, like, he didn't want anyone to see him suffering, he didn't want to have anyone pity him or, you know, solely identify him by his abuse. Like, all the energy it took for him to appear normal, I just felt like I understood him so well. And I feel it's important to have a depiction of a character like this to let survivors know and let people know that they're not alone in struggling with darker emotions. They're not alone in struggling just to live life. And so, yeah, I just feel like I read this book at the perfect time in my life, in a way, and I'm thankful for that. And I just want to say, I do think people who say that this book is like hopeless are completely missing the point. Like, I feel like if that's what you got out of this story, is that the idea that you'll never recover from abuse, and every abuse survivor is going to commit suicide and it's inevitable and all those type of things. If that's what you came away with from this book, I don't know that we've read the same book, because that is not how I interpreted it at all. I interpret it as almost a cautionary tale, and I want to be careful saying that, because I just mean that I think this is what happens in this book when you don't confront trauma. Like, Jude, time and time again, refuses to see a therapist. He refuses to, like, work on his mental health, basically. And it's understandable. It's so understandable that he finds it hard. He doesn't trust anyone. I mean, with the extremes of things that he's been through, is it even a choice for him to not see a therapist, to not get help? And I totally understand where he's coming from. Like, you know, I don't trust medicine. I don't trust therapists. Like, it feels like, you know, if I can't heal it myself, then, like, you know, it's not going to get healed. Like, so is it even a choice for Jude? Like, he's been so hurt from such a young age by so many people that it's like, is it even possible for him to choose to go to therapy, you know? But I feel like it's cautionary in that if you don't deal with trauma, it will eventually destroy you, because you think that by avoiding it, or not thinking about it, or pushing it away, or pretending like it didn't happen to you, or, you know, ignoring it, that you're fixing it. Like, you're like, okay, that, you know, that was another person. This is my life now. I create my life. And it's almost like you delude yourself into thinking that you are getting away from it, but you are not. Avoidance is a core symptom of PTSD, and I've been reading a lot of books about, like, trauma and memory and C-PTSD specifically, because I'm not diagnosing myself, but I feel like all the symptoms that I've had throughout my life perfectly align with C-PTSD, and I felt a lot of relief on reading about it, because suddenly all the things that are wrong with me and all the ways that I act, like, were perfectly explained, and it made sense. Like, my entire life made sense. The past 10 years made sense. So if you don't deal with your past, and even though it's incredibly difficult, it will come out in other ways. You will suffer in other ways, whether it's mentally, physical ailments like mysterious pains, just different things. It's going to come out later. You're not going to get away unscathed, in other words. And I wish someone had told me, you know, after I was kicked out of my house for being queer, I wish someone had told me, like, you know, you need to see someone, you need to talk about this, because it could have saved me a world of pain. Like, the past 10 years have been painful because there was unresolved issues that I was not dealing with. And I find it so difficult to talk about this book without also talking about myself and my past, because I just felt like I related to it on such a personal level. So hopefully this isn't like, I don't know, oversharing or uncomfortable or something for, like, you guys, but I just feel that I have to be open and honest about it. I want to be open and honest about it, because abuse, child abuse specifically, is such a taboo subject in our society that, like, you know, no one talks about it. Like, you can't just talk to people off the street about your abuse, and I think it creates a sense of isolation and aloneness, because you're, like, in a world of your own. Like, you can't really talk about it with anybody for fear of, I guess, scaring them or, you know, freaking them out, or and there's also a level of like, you know, will they believe me? Will they think I'm, you know, making this up? Will they think I'm, like, looking for attention? All these things, all these reasons why we can't discuss it. And that's also, like, exposing the abuser, you know, which creates a lot of problems a lot of times, especially if that abuser, and usually the abuser is someone that, like, the child knows, which makes it even harder to discuss the abuse. And a lot of people think that in order for it to be child abuse, you have to be a very young child, and obviously being a very young child does qualify, but child abuse is anywhere from the ages of a newborn to a 17-year-old, because you are still a child at 17, and a lot of the abuse that I went through was in my teenage years, not so much when I was, like, a younger kid, so I struggled with calling it child abuse, but that is the definition. So if it happened and you were a little bit older and you feel like, oh, well, I was 16 and I should have, you know, been able to handle it, no, you're still a child. And child abuse is one of the most just insidious things, because a child is so vulnerable that in every case it is the adult's responsibility to be the bigger person and protect them. And then when the adult fails to do that, it's so insidious, because children are some of the easiest targets. And so when you feel like you need to abuse a child to make yourself feel better or make yourself feel good, you were so weak, you were so pathetic, you were so horrible, because you were affecting them forever, and because you were targeting someone who was so innocent and so helpless. And I also just feel like this book isn't a hopeless book, because people who see it as, oh, well, Jude committed suicide, so he lost the fight against like all these struggles that he has, and so basically he failed. I don't see it as that at all. I see it as miraculous that Jude survived to be the age that he did, considering all that he went through, all that he struggled with. And people saying this, like, you know, that it's so depressing and it's so hopeless and it's so sad, like, think about the fact, would you be able to carry on for that long in Jude's shoes? Probably not. Like, he is a remarkable person. Like, he is extraordinary. And the tragedy of this book is the fact that he never realizes that he's extraordinary for surviving and persevering for as long as he has. And the thing about Jude is, and I find this so relatable, is that, you know, he can have all of these good friends, obviously his adoptive parents, all of these people, especially Willem, you know, pouring in unconditional love for him, you know, supporting him, telling him all these things, telling him that they love him, showing him that they love him, and yet he cannot receive that. If you guys know the Björk song, All Is Full of Love, there's a line in that song that's like, all is full of love, you just ain't receiving, your phone is off the hook, your doors are all shut. And I feel like that's Jude. Like, people are giving him this love and this affection, and he's just not able to feel it, he's not able to receive it, he's not able to believe these things that people are saying about him. I feel like I understand that so well. Like, it doesn't matter almost if other people think like you're good or you're smart or you're kind or you're whatever, if you can't personally see it and personally believe it. So I have been writing, and like, I felt compelled to write and share a lot of my journey as far as realizing and tackling my trauma on Instagram and stuff, of all places. But so something that I wrote that I just feel like directly describes what I'm trying to say is, I felt alone in the world because there was no one to help me. I never trusted or believed anyone who told me I was smart or nice or capable. Nothing anyone said could convince me I wasn't unlovable or worthless. And so yeah, I feel like that's the feeling of, like, the feeling I've had my entire life, where like, I feel like I'm an alien and, you know, no one can understand me and no one will ever get it. Like, that is being isolated away. Like, I never realized that feeling. Obviously that feeling comes from, you know, being all these marginalizations, like queer and, you know, black and all these different things, but it also, I feel like it comes from the sense of isolation that you feel when you're abused, because no one can get it, you know? And you can have all these people giving you unconditional love and giving you adoration, attention, whatever, and it's like, it's never good enough. You can't feel it because you can't personally believe it. And so I just feel like I understand Jude so well, and he feels like a real person because Yanagihara wrote him so well. And it's interesting because I watched a lot of, basically all of the author interviews with her about this book, and somebody point blank asked her, you know, where did Jude come from? You know, kind of, did you experience abuse? And she was like, no, I did no research on abuse for this book. And also, you know, Jude's just a character. Like, she didn't really confirm whether she's experienced abuse. But the way that she was able to write somebody who went through this and do it so well, like, I feel like Jude is like an emotional understanding of abuse, if that makes sense, because I feel like I've gained an academic understanding of abuse from all these books that I've been reading on, like, trauma and memory and C-PTSD, and obviously, like, I have a personal understanding of it because a lot of these things are things that I went through, but then Jude is like an emotional understanding. The best way to reach people, I think, is through fiction. And so explaining what abuse is and what it feels like to live with it, I feel like this book explains it. And it's just so amazing that she understood that trauma drastically impacts your memory, your ability to talk about it. It literally impacts and changes your brain, and specifically the language center of your brain. I think it's like Broca's area or something. It impacts your ability to speak about it. Yeah, just her fundamental understanding of what it would be like to go through abuse is just, it is so realistic that it makes you question, you know, did she also go through this? Because how could she get it? Like, how could she get it so well? And I'm not saying I understand every single thing about Jude, because he is somebody who self-harms, which one of the books I was reading, I think it was Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving, kind of talked about how either with abuse, you either turned inward with self-harm and things like, you know, alcohol and drug abuse, you internalize that, or you turn outward and it becomes like, you become like violent, angry, things like that. And I think Jude is somebody who very much like turns it inward, and I relate to that because I feel like, although I've never had problems with cutting, I have had issues with like alcohol and, you know, different things like that. So yeah, you either turn it inward or you turn it outward, and Jude is somebody who turns it inward. And I'm so glad that she explored Willem and Jude's relationship. I saw a lot of people complaining that they didn't really like the fact that Willem and Jude got in a sexual relationship together, and I do understand why that was upsetting, because it's like, because Jude is not able to communicate that he doesn't like sex and that he's been sexually abused, it's Willem, the person he loves most and that arguably loves him most, ends up being the exact person who is hurting and triggering him because he's not able to communicate that. So I understand why that's upsetting, but at the same time I really enjoyed seeing them explore that, because I was kind of shipping it from the beginning. I'm really glad that we went there and that she made the choice to go there and explore that. And also, the thing that I find so romantic about their relationship is that they were trying to build something that, even if it didn't look like a customary or a typical relationship, they were trying to build something that worked for them. And I feel like that's kind of always been my philosophy. I'm like, whatever works for us, it doesn't matter how it looks on the outside. It doesn't matter how it looks to other people. Only thing that should matter is what works for us, you know? And so I just find that so romantic. A lot of things about the relationship were very romantic, but that was a big one. I also feel like another reason this book is so great is because it makes you appreciate life and your loved ones so much. Something I was messaging to a friend, it's painful to read Willem because you realize you're going to lose the person you love someday, and or they're going to lose you and you don't know which, and it makes you just want to hug them and look at them, memorize them, and tell them you love them. Yeah, because you never know when you're going to lose somebody. And to all the people saying this book is so depressing and it's so, they don't like it because they feel like the message is that you can never get better if you're an abuse survivor, I just don't believe that. I said, Jude still gets to experience moments of happiness and love. And if you think about it, we all die and are born alone anyway. Not to be depressing. But like, he got some companionship along the way and someone who knew his full story, and that's the best any of us can hope for, really. And again, I think the fact that he didn't get better is so understandable. And I feel like the ending almost raises questions of, you know, is euthanasia ethical? Should we let people who want to die, because that's their life and it's their choice? And I feel like she's discussing all these topics that are very sensitive, like cutting and suicide, and that are still so misunderstood in our society, because, you know, people who cut and self-harm and commit suicide and things like that, they're not selfish. And I feel like I see that narrative so often in different books, films, different things, that they're being selfish and they're just looking for attention, when it's like, no, these people are suffering, and they are suffering so bad that they want the suffering to stop, or they're trying to regulate their emotions. That's what cutting is, trying to self-regulate, because you're emotionally dysregulated. It is not because you are being a bad person, or, you know, like, there's just this narrative of you're such a shitty person if you commit suicide, and I just really hate that narrative. So anyways, yeah, I did cry for like the last 20% of this book, like ugly crying, like not just like a delicate single manly tear, like full on, just like, I'm so glad I was alone when I was reading this, because I was just like, you know, like crying uncontrollably. Like, by the end of this book, you will look like the cover of this book. And if you don't, like, I honestly don't understand where your heart is. I'm just gonna say it. I'm not saying you have to cry, I'm just saying be prepared, because the ending of this is like a serious tearjerker. And I also think people who complain like, oh, this many bad things wouldn't happen to one person, it's so unrealistic for Jude to go through this many things, I don't agree. Is it unlikely? Yes. Is it impossible? No. And I feel like people being like, well, there's no way someone could go through all this and survive all this, and this is just ridiculous, she just makes every bad thing in the world happen to him. Like, okay, there are people that suffer this horribly, mentally and physically. And so the fact that you're like, this could never happen, and this is unrealistic, like, think again. And I feel like another thing in this book is like, you have to bear witness to the things that Jude has gone through. You get to know him at the beginning as a human. You don't know, you know, what his issues are. You don't know what his past is, but you want to know. I feel like that's realistic to life because you see only what people present. You don't see their past. You don't see the things that happened to them that, you know, made them who they are. You don't see any of that. And so you see the surface and then you get to look beyond the surface, if that makes any sense. And reading this book reminded me, there's a painting where it's like, it's really trippy, but it's like a baby crawling out of their mother's womb, and then like there's like a depiction of the child as they grow and become old and then like are sort of reborn as like a fetus. Like I'll put the painting here. But honestly, I feel like one of the great things about this book is that it reminded me of so many other pieces of art, and I don't know if that's just because there's so much discussion of art in this book. Like JB is an artist, for example, you know, and Malcolm's an architect, and you know, Willem's an actor. So there's all these different types of art that are incorporated into this book, and I don't see people talking about this a lot. So I feel like maybe I'm just thinking of other pieces of art because there's so many other pieces of art that are mentioned in this book. You know, and Jude, for example, is a pianist and a lawyer, obviously, and so there's all these different like mediums and art forms that are talked about and mentioned throughout the book, which I thought was like sort of a great meta commentary. So I think if you enjoy art or are interested in art, that you will also really like this book. And I also just want to talk about JB really quickly. I noticed a lot of people in their vlogs were talking about how much they hated JB and thought that he was an asshole, but I actually really feel for JB. He was an asshole for certain things, like he violated Jude's boundaries, you know, he broke his word on several occasions. He just generally always said and did the wrong thing, even when he had good intentions, and he's just one of those people that sort of, his mouth fires before his brain. And so I felt bad for him because I felt like, you know, he was always trying to have good intentions, but he just fucked up all the time. Like he was just bad at interpersonal relations, basically. And I feel like that was very relatable because like he's brilliant, but he's kind of a dick. And yeah, I don't know. I just want to defend JB real quick because he was one of the characters that I feel like I really enjoyed. Like, Willem's sweet and everything, but JB is one of those people that's gonna say what everyone's thinking, and even though everyone else is also thinking it, he's gonna get the shit for it. He's the one's gonna take it because his mouth just fires, you know? Like, kind of offensive, but he's also kind of telling the truth, if that makes sense. And so, relatable. So I feel like he kind of needs to learn how to, like, temper that, and especially in regards to Jude, because some of the things that he does to Jude are just like, I totally understand where their friendship fell apart, because I feel like I've had incidents in my life where it's like, you know, yeah, you crossed a line and it's never the same after you cross that line. No matter what you do, I'm never gonna forget that. Like, I might forgive it, but I'm not gonna forget it, you know? So things won't really be the same after that. And I feel like it was sort of realistic how his relationship with JB just kind of tapered off. Okay, so I couldn't end this video. I literally just turned the camera back on to talk about this because I realized I forgot. Without talking about Caleb. And I just want to say to all the people that were bitching and moaning about the fact that, you know, Jude got in a relationship with Caleb, and, you know, that was fucked up. Why did she write that on top of all the things that already happened to him? Caleb is an absolutely integral part of this story. Why? Because something that happens to a lot of abuse survivors is re-traumatization. It's also called re-victimization. And I'm just gonna read. Re-traumatization is a conscious or unconscious reminder of past trauma that results in a re-experiencing of the initial trauma event. It can be triggered by situation, attitude, expression, certain environments to replicate the dynamics, the loss of power, control, safety of the original trauma. And I think we really see this with the intense beating that Caleb does to Jude. It's like the part where he's thinking about the axiom of equality, that like, this is who we'll always be, and is kind of like trying to survive the beating. Like, I feel like it triggers him back into that state, and after that is when we get like a lot of Jude's past, like, it triggers his memories of the past. Re-victimization is a real thing. Like, the statistics are really, really high on, you know, once you've been abused once, the likelihood of, for example, an assault occurring again gets higher. So this is a really realistic part of Jude's story, even though it's not the most pleasant to read about. There are a lot of scenes in here that are extremely difficult to read, that almost like made me physically cringe because they're so difficult to read, with the cutting and the beating especially, and just a lot of really difficult scenes. So I don't think this story could have been told without someone like Caleb, and I think a lot of people who have been through abuse are attracted to people that treat them in abusive ways without even realizing that that's what they're gravitating to, or that those types of people, you know, narcissists, people that just want to hurt people, are really attracted to people that they see as vulnerable. And I think this is what happened with Caleb and Jude. Just a bad dynamic. And so people that are saying that was unrealistic and unnecessary, wrong. I have so many rebuttals for people who criticize different things about this book, but that was a major one that really, really bothered me as someone who grew up, you know, seeing domestic abuse in the home, and somebody who has been in abusive relationships in the past. So yeah, I couldn't end this video without talking about Caleb. I just want to say that I really respect the author for having the guts to go there and really discuss these issues, not in a way that's removed or glossing over it, but really diving into it, because a lot of people say that the depictions of abuse are gratuitous in this book, but I just want to say that abuse itself is gratuitous. Like, it is unnecessary, it is disgusting, and the fact that she was willing to deal in depth with such dark, taboo, and usually unspoken topics, I really respect her for that, and I think there is an audience for that and a need for that. And yeah, I love this book and I love this author just so much. So yeah, I think that's a lot of my thoughts. I don't know that I have perfectly articulated everything, but this is probably getting long enough. So if you guys have read this book, I would love to discuss it with you. If you plan on reading it, I would love for you to read it. I think I'm going to try to encourage as many people as I can to read this book, even though they might hate me for it. Yeah, that's going to be it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I hope you guys are having a good day. Peace.